Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's video. This week we are going to be discussing yet another concept, another tool that I employ when making sculptures, and that is contours. I've mentioned contours a lot and hinted at a video coming out on the subject in the future. Well, the future is now, and so it's time to discuss contours, what it means, how I use them, and how to make them as interesting as possible. When there's not an image up illustrating what I'm talking about, I'll have footage of me slowly rendering the surface of my figure. So if that's interesting to you as well, you can turn off the sound and just watch how I go about rendering and cleaning up the surface a bit. Also, I apologize for some shoddy Photoshop work. One day, all of these concept videos will be revisited and remade with proper graphics. For now, there'll be some simple illustrative examples to further explain what I'm talking about. So what is contours? The contours are the outline of the body as we observe it. Imagine we're looking to draw the human figure. We convert the three-dimensional figure into 2D on paper. The contour is the outline of our figure. Usually we'll refer to contour and internal information. They're two separate things. Internal information obviously sits inside the contours being the outlines. And we'll get back to the connection between the contours and the internal information later on in this video, as it is very important, but perhaps a little bit more advanced. I'll refer to several other concepts I've done videos on, so there will be links in the top right corner whenever they are mentioned, and there will be a link in the description below to the concepts playlist. Okay, so let's start in a simple fashion. The one thing I haven't done a video on yet, but soon will, is how I observe the figure. And I'll be brief in explaining it, but it is important to how I deal with the contours. And it's not my method, it's Rob Bottom's method. I think he calls it the planar method, something like that. I observe the figure from 4 views: front, back, and 2 sides. And I use the box, which is a simplified pelvis, to make sure I orient my model and my sculpture so that I observe both from the front. Because what is really the front of the human figure? We have to make a decision, an arbitrary decision on what we'll treat as the front. And I, and everybody else at the Florence Academy, treat the 2 aces points and the plane that they make as the front of the body. In the back, I use the 2 pieces points. And from the sides, it's a little bit more difficult from the sides, but I try to find the side plane of the pelvis, picturing it as a box. So with my 4 views defined, I can always get back to observing from these 4 views, which makes my observation over time consistent. So I'm observing the same thing, the exact same view, on Monday and on Friday. This ensures that I don't end up constantly editing my contours, because I'm constantly observing a different version of the contour. It will minimize the differences. There will be differences, of course, because models move, and there's nothing to be done about that. But it will minimize the differences, and minimal differences is better than large differences, obviously. Now, with the 4 views defined, I can observe the contour of my figure in a 2-dimensional way. But sculpture is obviously 3-dimensional, but we'll get back to that pretty soon. My sculptures are grown from the inside out, and so using these 4 views, I'll slowly grow the contour outwards. Remember, widths are forgiving and heights are not. So I do my best to define the heights accurately so they don't have to move too much, but the widths I'm prepared to let grow very, very slowly over time. When observing the contour, I try to think of the reason it moves. I've spoken about it before in my centerline video, but I'll mention it here briefly again. On either side of the bony mass of the ribcage and pelvis, there will be symmetry in overall width. There will be symmetry in the angle breaks in the contour, and there is symmetry in the internal information depending on where the form's attached to and what pose the body takes. So I keep this in mind, and I don't build the contours on both sides of the body independently, knowing that they both need to work together. I prefer to rotate the model every 25 minutes so that I bring each contour up together. I guess I'm just used to doing it this way because it's the way we did it in school when we were several students sharing one model. And I do know several people who focus in on one view more for a while before connecting the main view, be it the front or the back or whatever, with the other views. But I prefer to work around the model, switching views every 25 minutes. This, I think, is a good time to mention Patreon. If you are interested in learning sculpture from me personally and get feedback on your work, either on email or via video chat, my Patreon page is the place for you. You'll get in-depth feedback on techniques and how you can apply them to your own work. Anything sculpture related goes. We can talk about armatures, supplies, mold making, anything you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. You'll also get 25% off on my web store plus accumulated credits equal to the amount you pledge that can be used for further discounts. So check it out, the link is in the description below. So, as I mentioned, I begin by treating the contours in a two-dimensional way, but that doesn't get me very far because the contours on a human body moves in space. They do not travel up and down the body in a straight line, kind of like a long wall. And a lot of beginning students treat the contour in this fashion, but I think, and it's an okay way to start, but it is false, so keep that in mind. The contours are built up of many overlapping forms, each with their own direction and position in space. So very soon, way before I'm even at risk of reaching my overall widths, I want to begin thinking and moving in this direction. So how do I go about that? Let me take a couple of easy examples that will illustrate very clearly that the contours are not four walls traveling up and down the center of the body. The back is a great example because we are all intimately familiar with the butt, or gluteus if the butt offends you for some reason. The butt has a crack or a crease down the middle, right here, and the peak of each buttock is closer to being here, further out from the middle than it is to being here, close to the crease and the center line of the pelvis. Now what if I told you that this is the case, or more or less the case anyway, with every single part of the contour? The scapulas are another obvious example. They don't sit even close to the center, well, they sit close to the center line, but they're not on the center line either. The contour of the scapula and buttocks must be observed from the side views. From the back, they are both internal information, but the back view reveals to us where they sit in space. And so we have advanced and began using two separate views of our model to piece our figure together. A sculpture is observed over time because it takes time to make one, especially one that's good. And so we have to use these methods to piece our figure together from several separate views observed at separate points in time. And as I said before, I didn't design or come up with this method, Robert Bodum did, but it seems to me that this method of sculpting is attempting, or at least achieving, to as best as it can, to protect us from this. By using four views and a consistent and replicable, is that even the word? Replicable way of observing the model, we can piece a figure together, even though things will be observed looking slightly differently at different times. If we can stay consistent and use the four views, the center line, and the guidelines of building our contours, we can set the figure up properly and in the least problematic fashion possible. I was amazed when I started learning under Rob because he actually had something to teach. A technique, something concrete, a way of doing things that still included a lot of freedom for you to express yourself. And for me, this was a revelation. We always say that we don't teach sculpture in general at Florence Academy, we teach a specific method of sculpting. But this method of sculpting is so flexible and can be used in so many different ways and on so many different subjects. You will find with any method, I think, that it will bump up against hurdles in some cases, but the method encompasses so many things that it will help you clear those hurdles. An example of a hurdle could be a reclining figure where the four views method doesn't function very well, obviously, because some of our foreviews are not really easily visible to us. But then we have the structure that we can use, the box and the egg and the center line, and we can lean on those to create a successful sculpture. So let me show you some more examples of contours situated in space. We'll take the back view again, and we'll do a little bit of the front view as well, and the red lines will represent the contour if we observe the figure from the side. So this is the contour from the side view, but looked at from the back. These are by no means defined rules, by the way, and you have to observe on your model, but here is how I've applied it on my figure at least. And here's the front as well. And here is what a simplified version of the same thing could look like if I didn't get this much movement out of it. But the more complicated version I believe to be the way more interesting. Some of this is very hard to observe, but always keep in mind that you need to use two views to properly observe this. And sometimes the sculpture shuffle is needed to slowly shuffle or move around from one view to the next to discover more clearly how the contour moves. Always keep in mind that the contour from one view is internal information from another view, and that you can discover where the internal information sit in relationship with your center line from one view, and then use it in the next view to build out the actual shape of the contour in the correct place in space. So what makes a truly interesting contour? Well, for me, it's the contour that moves well in space and that when observed and imagined in a flat two-dimensional way, creates many overlaps. Here is a pencil drawing that my very talented girlfriend, Neve Butler, made, and here are a couple of areas with overlaps. Now, what these overlaps achieve in this drawing is that they describe what forms sit in front and what forms recedes back in space. These overlaps are part of several visual tricks people who draw well can employ to trick our eye into believing that we are watching a three-dimensional object or person. So that's a really good reason to focus on drawing as a sculptor, because drawing, and especially pencil drawing, will help you, or line drawing, will help reveal to you the direction of contours and what forms sit in front and what forms recede. It's extremely valuable to know this, and it will speed up the process tremendously, keeping you from fumbling around a ton trying to figure out where your contours, which direction your contours move in, what sit in front of what. Several things are very much the same from person to person, and so building up a visual library to reference from is extremely useful. And I think drawing is the easiest and fastest way to do it, even though it's not fast or easy, but the easiest and the fastest. Okay, back to some interesting contours. There's an element of design, at least for me, at least I think there is. My inclination is to believe that there's an element of design when it comes to contours. This does not mean that deviating in a severe fashion from nature is going to bring on the best results, but it does mean that being brave and explore how you can attempt to elevate your contour beyond nature is potentially really useful. And perhaps believing that you can elevate anything beyond nature is a bit presumptuous, but I think it's a good goal to have, even though you might never succeed in doing so. And so I try to get more movement out of my contours than what my model provides me with. This can perhaps happen in an area like this, or perhaps right here. Now, these contours in my model might be a bit more connected. And I guess there's an argument to be made that doing things like this breaks up the contour too much, breaks up the figure too much. And I think that is a valid argument, but I do think that it comes down to subjective taste to a certain extent, just as how extreme you take your modeling comes down to personal taste as well, at least within reasons. And so one way is as valid as the next, as long as it yields decent results. And I'll let you be the judge of if my results are decent or not. Which brings me to something that I'm perhaps not qualified to talk about, but as usual, I will talk about it nonetheless. And that is different kinds of sculpture, namely two different kinds. Sculpture with focus on contour and sculpture with focus on form. I would firmly put myself in the camp of sculptors who are more interested in forms rather than contours. Of course, my sculptures do need contours, every sculpture does. If not, they will envelop the world and end all life in a mess of clay. But the focus, for me, is internal information. The major design work has happened, or is happening, to the internal information, not the contour. Here is where such a way of sculpting can fall short, by the way. The first impression is often the outline of the figure. I think sculptures who have the contours as the most important element, and the contour, well-designed contours, succeed better at the initial impression, and capturing the eye better and faster than figures with the focus on internal information. Figures with focus on contours will read well, or pretty good at least, will read better, let's say, no matter the lighting. Sculptures with focus on internal information really need good lighting to light the internal information and present it in a pleasing fashion. This often is not the case, and when you put your sculpture in a gallery or a museum, and you are not in full control of the lighting situation, you might be in for an unpleasant surprise. A sculpture which relies on its contours to succeed doesn't rely as much on being well lit, and will work well in any lighting situation. A sculpture with strong, well-designed contour could be backlit, for example, and all you could see would be the outline and the figure is all black, and it would still look good because the outline, the contours, are well designed and well thought out. That's not the case with a sculpture defined by its internal information. I'm trying to get better at incorporating the contour more in my design decisions. The contour of this sculpture, for example, I believe to be way stronger than the contour of the King of the Rusted Crown, for example, where I didn't even consider contours at all. And frankly, in this sculpture, I didn't really consider contours that much either, but I do believe that the pose and the way I've composed the figure lends itself to a stronger contour. I've never been a huge fan of letting any technical aspect or even design aspect compromise my vision. For example, I never let mold making considerations change what I believe to be a good pose. And with the King of the Rusted Crown, I clearly don't let contour design compromise what I believe to be an interesting sculpture either. So I'll probably continue to make sculptures that have less than ideal outlines and most of the focus on internal information. But in the sculpture you're watching me make here, I hope I've gotten closer to accomplish both. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I encourage you to check out my Patreon page. I give feedback and critiques on people's work, and we talk about whatever you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. There are several rewards, one of them being the maquette for this very sculpture you've seen me working on today. So check it out, the link is in the description below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for a new video next Thursday. Subscribe and hit the bell to be notified whenever a video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and share with your friends and family. It helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.